Happy Friday, everybody. Thank you for joining me here in the Locher Room on this December 8th. I'm Alan Locher. Emmy Award and WGA winning writer Jamey Giddens joins me live today to look back at his career as the co-owner and editorial director of the popular entertainment news website DaytimeConfidential.com and as a co-host on the site's companion podcast where he has spent over a decade. Jamey is the creator and executive producer of Ambitions, a steamy one-hour drama series from Will Packer Media and Lionsgate TV that aired on the Oprah Winfrey Network in 2019. He also helped develop Urban Movie Channel's hit long-running dramedy, The Rich and The Ruthless. What an incredible title that is. Co-writing the first episodes of that series. Jamey has won 2 Writers Guild of America awards and 1 Daytime Emmy for his work on Days of Our Lives. And maybe this Friday, some more. Please help me welcome to the Locher Room for the first time, Jamey Giddens. Hey, Jamey.
Hey, Alan. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I know we talked about it, backstage. I wasn't sure if we had met in person. We probably met on the Daytime Emmy red carpets.
Yes.
We've both been at this a long time.
Absolutely. Yeah, we were on the other side of this sort of fence back then.
we definitely were. Well, I'd love to get to know you a little bit. Where did you grow up, Jamey?
So I grew up in a really small town called DeKalb, Texas. It is really close to Texarkana. Any fans of the Smokey and the Bandit franchise might remember that was the whole plot. They were trying to get the beer back from Texarkana. So yeah, I grew up, on the Texas-Arkansas border. Went to college in Arkansas, Southern Arkansas University, and double majored in print and broadcast journalism there. So yeah.
I did see that, and I'll come back to that. I love that very much. But from what I've heard and read, you've been a lifelong Daytime fan. Who first introduced you to soaps, and which ones?
My grandparents. And it really wasn't a conscious introduction, because I can remember when I was a small kid, my grandmother would make me leave the room, whenever there was some.
Well, that was a good adult,
right? But after a while, she just saw that I wasn't interested in watching Sesame Street. I wanted to watch, Rachel and Mac and Victor and Nikki, and so I kind of became her VCR during the summer months before we had a VCR, because I had this sort of photographic memory. So she'd come home and say, "What happened on the stories?" And I would say, "Well, Victor almost caught Jack and Nikki sleeping together," and that I just rattle it off. And then
so Bay and Genoa City were her shows.
Well, actually, so many soap fans are, network based. My grandmother was a little different. She and my grandfather watched The Young and the Restless, and then they switched to NBC for that whole lineup. So for the only soap she watched on CBS was The Young and the Restless. And then they turned it, and it was Days, Another World, and Santa Barbara. So that was my grandparents.
You're right. Like, my mother was a CBS, and that's why, for me, it was As the World Turns and Guiding Light. And I probably would have been.
Eventually, she did start watching Bold and the Beautiful, but it was really because of that whole Sheila spinoff story. So we added Bold during that time.
Yeah. I mean, you have to follow Sheila wherever she goes.
Absolutely.
100%. Talk about what you remember from watching as a kid. What were some of your favorite stories? Who were some of your favorite characters? I'd love to know.
Oh, yeah, Bo and Hope were my, first favorite, super couple. It was just something about, they were just the dark hair, and they were both so gorgeous, and, Doug not wanting his princess with the bad boy merchant marine. So that was probably my earliest, this couple hooked me. Then I would say of course, I just fell in love with Santa Barbara as the first soap I kind of watched from the beginning that wasn't so much my grandparents' soaps, but I was old enough to kind of follow along. And, it was so beautiful, and all the beach scenes with Robin Wright and Marcy Walker. And, then I just really kind of glommed onto it because it was such a smart soap. It was so, witty and verbose with Lane Davies and Nancy Lee Grahn and, Louise Sorrell. But Daytime Confidential fans will know my true favorite soap was Another World. I mean, it just, by the time, around the mid to late 80s, around the time Anne Hesh joined, I was obsessed with every end of show freeze frame. It was like I had to tune in the next day to see what kind of trashy goings on Jake, Donna, Vicky, and Marley, had gotten themselves into. And then at some point, I just became sort of borderline obsessed with the whole genre. I blame Soap Opera Weekly and Mimi Torchin because they were so good at giving you the summaries of the soaps you didn't watch, and Digest did this too. It would provide you with the full history. No one does that today. And so you could sit there and read about One Life to Live or As the World Turns. So, I ended up adding, one soap by another. I added On My Children around 1990. I watched Kelly Ripa's first air show and, fell in love with Haley Vaughn. And, next thing you know, I'm watching All My Children. And then by the time we get to SoapNet, it's like, oh, I don't even have to try to, overwork out my TiVo. I can just watch them all. So yeah, and it just, it gave me some strange looks growing up in Texas in the locker rooms that, that I was, not wanting to talk about the Cowboys game. I was wanting to talk about Erica Kane, but hey, here I am.
I understand that well, Jamey. Understand that well. Mysterio, aka Alan McLaren, as many fans are sending their love and saying hello to you.
Hello, everyone.
Alan is saying Jamey is a great writer and soap commentator. Daytime Confidential was his baby. Hope he visits his roots soon.
Well, it's actually Luke Harris' baby, but thank you so much. It was Luke. Yes. I always say Luke gave birth to it, and then I'm the adopted parent.
So funny. And Mac Woody says, "Oh, Jamey, goodness, he caught a lot of hell for the truth he spoke about my beloved guiding light."
I was so silly and mean back then. I had no idea. That's the thing, Alan. It's like, I say this all the time. If I had it to go back again, now that I know what it takes to produce an episode of soap opera, I would never have been that critical because now I get it. It's a labor of love.
Well, yeah, same here. I understand. I always said the only time I ever called a network was when they fired Scott DeFreitas from As the World Turns. I couldn't understand how they could get rid of a family member. But now, having worked in it, I know money and story and sets and all of those things that go into putting something together.
Absolutely.
It's not because they, want to get rid of a family member per se.
Exactly. Yeah.
You had, so from an early age, or what early age would you say you have always wanted to write for a soap? Is that correct?
So I knew, the actual crystallization of wanting to write for soaps, you guys were kind of instrumental with that with Procter and Gamble. But before that, I didn't.
Why Procter and Gamble? Their writing program?
My first thought or plan was that I was going to be a novelist. I always knew that I would major in journalism sort of as a, because I didn't want to be the whole starving artist waiting tables. So I was like, I'll get a degree in journalism, and that way I can make a living while I'm pursuing but I was also a huge fan of Jackie Collins and Sidney Sheldon and Terry McMillan. So I kind of thought back then in high school, I'm going to write novels. And then I got to college, and you guys had the Procter and Gamble college writing competition. And that was like one of the first, I could possibly do this for a living. And so submitted to that a couple of times, submitted to the ABC Daytime Writer Training Program. So that was kind of when it sort of crystallized that, oh, okay, maybe TV writing. I mean, I still, my dream is to still write books at some point, but since TV is more of a young man's game, I figured I'll focus on TV, and then when I'm older, more near retirement age, I'll write books.
Did you hear from Procter and Gamble, I hope?
I did. I always got really positive feedback, but it was like close but no cigars.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you got a response at least.
Yeah.
Was your dream to write for another world, or was there?
Oh God, yes. Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean, when I tell you I have a reboot ready to go, I'm like, I'm hoping look, I'm not kidding you. Like, and a lot of the fans know it. I mean, I tweeted, I used to get bored and I would tweet out like storylines, like what I felt like the characters from Another World were doing, or Knots Landing, or any of these shows that I love.
Yeah.
I have a bit of ADHD, but it's kind of like my superpower when I channel it in that direction, But yeah, no, I love Another World was my heart for sure.
Well, there's a fan reunion next May, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, where is that going to be at?
Here in New York.
Okay.
I'm looking up the date. It's a 60th anniversary celebration. You can hear the music possibly right now.
Oh yeah, you'll have to send me that. I would love that.
I'll send you this.
I still
May
have to
4th
listen to
in Terrytown, New York.
What's that?
May 4th in Terrytown, New York.
Okay.
I'll send that to you for sure. I'll send that your way.
Awesome.
As you said, you studied journalism. Did you have an interest in journalism, and where did that begin?
So yes, and a lot of it kind of it just became something I was good at. Southern Arkansas University was a really small school. I always knew the dramatic arts were my first love, but the only program they really had there that I could have pursued that was theater, which was definitely actor based, and I knew I didn't really want to act. So although I did Little Shop of Horrors and a couple of other Christmas Carol and things like that, and other people would tell me that's what you should be doing, but I knew that writing was what I wanted. So I just kind of figured I'll get a journalism degree, move to New York, and kind of work for magazines or newspapers while I try to break in to one of the P&G soaps, because by that point I was watching As the World Turns also, and Guiding Light. I had added Guiding Light. I started watching Guiding Light after Santa Barbara was canceled. So I really loved the New York soaps. I mean, I just always felt they were so meaty and powerful. I mean, I loved Roger and Holly. I mean, you definitely couldn't tell that story today, and probably rightfully so. I mean, you can't have a love story with a rapist, and his victim. But I mean, I think the actors just sold it so well that I was just mesmerized. It was like watching theater, So
you must have been in love with Kim Zimmer from Santa Barbara before Reva.
So I love Reva. I will say, and hopefully Kim won't beat me up for this. I was not really happy when she came to Santa Barbara because I didn't know the legend of Reva. You have to understand, I didn't start watching Guiding Light until after Santa Barbara. So when Kim came on, that was part of like this, what happens at the end of a soap opera. Everybody's doing whatever they can to save the show. And, before I knew it, all of my beloved Santa Barbara characters were kind of backburnered. And it was all these stars coming in from other soaps. And I was like, where is Eden? Where is Cruz? But of course, again, what we were talking about, that wasn't those actors' fault, but, 15-year-old Jamey was like, these people are eating my show. But
absolutely. As fans, now that you and I work in the industry, it's different. Like as fans, you don't really know all the machinations behind.
No. And now I totally see it. It's like you have a show that's dead last in the ratings, and Kim Zimmer is a superstar. Teo Pinglas is a superstar. Stephen Nichols. So, I mean, they really did this Herculean effort to try to, like, Jack Wagner. I mean, it was a who's who at the end of Santa Barbara, but, you know, for a core fan, I'm like, I want Augusta and Lionel and Mason and Julia. So, but once I did start watching Guiding Light and she returned, I was like, okay, I get it. This is why she's a superstar. So, yeah.
So tell me some of your favorite Guiding Light and World Turns stories.
Oh, Reva versus Annie Dutton, honey. That, when that woman threw Reva out of that plane, I was like, what am I watching? This show is wild.
She ended up on the island.
Yes, you know, and then she got cloned. I was like, this show is right up my alley. But I really loved that when the first year I watched, you know, Beverly McKenzie was still there. And I mean, Alexandra was just everything. And, you know, Roger and Mindy and, you know, that dirty affair and everybody in town telling Holly to stay away from Roger, but she just couldn't stay away, you know, when Billy beat the crap out of him and Holly is like rushing to his side. I mean, it was just so, you know, and I really loved that Guiding Light gave me one of my first, you know, examples of a Black woman character not having to be relegated to the dutiful best friend. And gosh, I can't think of her name. She had that little Halle Berry haircut. Jilly, you know,
Amelia Marshall.
Yes, and she was so ambitious and, you know, screwed over the Lewises for her career and was in cahoots with Roger. You know, I wasn't used to that because at that time, you know, that was, you know, later on in the 90s, we got to see like Renee Jones really get to kind of vamp it up on days. But, you know, prior to that, it was like the whole Angie Hubbard model, you know, the kind of heroine Black character. And it was like, we want to be messy too. We want to be, you know, ratchet and get an evil twin. And, you know, so I really enjoyed Jilly, you know, and a young Nia Long. I mean, come on, you know, Guiding Light was like a training ground for some of the big stars of today.
And Monty Sharp was there at that time. Yeah. And Hamp.
Yes, I loved his relationship with Billy and
you
know,
I can't think of his name.
Oh,
Vince Williams. Vince Williams. I was blanking on his name.
Yes. Wasn't he like a former football player in real life? I think. Or maybe on the show.
I don't know. And what about World Turns?
So World Turns, you know, I followed Jake McKinnon there. So,
yeah.
So I first like really, you know, connected to the similarities to Another World. You know, they had the big publishing dynasties. I loved Lucinda Walsh, loved Holden and Lily and their whole extended family. I think really Jack and Carly, though, became As the World Turns for me. I mean, that, you know, star-crossed, you know, love affair between them. Loved Craig and Rosanna. I always thought that they had, you know, an amazing, you know, young adult set. I mean, and to their credit, pretty much all of them went on to primetime success. It's like something was in the water at As the World Turns. It's like they all ended up, you know, in primetime and film. And, you know, and I look now and I still have those moments of, I remember him from World Turns, you know, and so like Billy
even
Mack
from the 80s, you know, you had Stephen Weber and Julianne Moore and Marissa Tomei and Meg Ryan. And
I mean, it's just Whitney Houston. I think her first TV appearance was on World Turns. So it's like,
and Lauryn Hill.
I didn't know that. I did not know that. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's, you know, and it's just that New York thing, you know. That theater.
Candace Mack says, tell Jamey that he is and will always be one of my role models. Love him and so proud of him.
Yeah, I think she does like, you know, we were talking before the show about how the podcast world has changed and now there's all these scripted podcasts. I think Candace has a couple of them. So
Forever and a Day, you know, 4 or 5 seasons of that.
See, that's amazing. Yeah.
So you started as a reporter in Texas. Were you doing entertainment when you first started?
No, I definitely, cut my teeth doing that in student newspapers. But when I actually wrote the city beat. I mean, I covered
Oh.
9/11 for Texas newspapers because, after 9/11, there were all of those scares with the anthrax being sent around. And, I mean, I covered hard news
Oh,
for,
wow.
Texas daily newspapers and newspapers in Arkansas and Louisiana. And yeah, I'd get the occasional entertainment or art story, but in small towns like that, small rural towns, that definitely wasn't like getting to review the latest TLC album. It was more, like Hope, Arkansas had the Watermelon Festival, and it was like, okay, Jamey, go cover the Watermelon Festival. Or, at one point, I covered everything. I covered doggy weddings. I covered, rock the vote, when they would come to town. It was just really, you really are a general assignment reporter at a small town. You might be fixing the printer, at any
That's
given
funny.
moment. They're really small, mom and pop shops. And yeah, but
Wow.
that trained me in, understanding narrative structure, though, the who, what, when, where, why, but all, because scripted TV does, that too, and that act structure, it really kind of having that foundation in journalism helps me really break down a story, and its components pretty easily.
Incredible. I love that you also spent time doing my role as an award-winning publicist for the Department of the Army.
I
How did
did.
you
I
how did
did.
you get that role?
So, I graduated from college in 2000. And, again, like I said, my plan was work for newspapers until you can write a script and break into soaps. Well, I graduated at the time that newspapers are dying was the top headline. And I gave newspapers the college try for several years. And I had risen to the grade of, I was a city editor at a newspaper, but I wasn't making enough money to even have an apartment. I was still living with my grandparents. And literally one of my cousins, who was a manager at Burger King, was making more money than I was as the city editor of a newspaper. I mean, when I graduated, mid-sized Texas newspapers were offering $9 to $10 an hour. And, if you've got student loans and things like that, there was just no, way you really had to do it for the love. And I didn't love it that much. And so,
I'd like a roof over my head. I'd like some
right,
food. I'd like clothes.
and it can be a dangerous job too. Like I would show up, I showed up one time at a house to cover a house fire, and of course I'm sympathetic to this poor family that's lost their house, but then I look up and I see they have a big old Confederate flag in their yard, and I'm like, okay, I'm getting paid $10 an hour for this. So, my aunt, who worked at the local Army depot, Red River Army Depot, was basically like, they're looking for paid interns. Sent me the link. I applied kind of on a lark. I got accepted. And the paid government internship paid way more than I had ever been paid as a newspaper reporter. So I was like, okay, I'm going into the federal government system. And I started off as a quality assurance specialist, which I was woefully unprepared to do that job. I mean, quality assurance specialists are the people that go inspect the tanks and make sure that and I'm like, okay, I can't even change the oil in my car. So
Me neither. So I get
right.
that.
So
Yeah.
I left, I did 2 years of the federal government that time. And I was like, I had friends who were like, who cares? They're paying us. And I'm like, I don't feel good about this, because they drilled it into our head. you are what's standing between the soldier in the field and disaster. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want that on my conscience. So I left and went to work for Pulitzer as an editorial assistant for the vice president for news at the company's corporate headquarters. And that's around the time that I discovered soap blogging, because I would be so bored at my day job. I'd go collate some some documents for my boss or get him some coffee or whatever, and then he'd leave me to my own devices, and I went down the rabbit hole that it was soap opera message boards, and I kind of developed a following on the then SoapNet message boards. And people would say, you need to blog. And I was like, what is blog? I didn't even know what that was, what the term was. And then I met Luke Kerr, my business partner, and we were both hired to blog at a small soap site that's no longer in business. And it just wasn't for me. And so I was like, this is distracting me from my goal to break into writing soaps. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to go do that. And so by that time, Luke started Daytime Confidential. I left Pulitzer and got a job at the Corpus Christi Army Depot as their publicist. And so I moved from Illinois back to Texas. And Luke started Daytime Confidential. And I really didn't, for a year, he was like, we want you to join. I was like, no, I don't want to do it. I'm like, I want to be a soap opera writer, and that might take away from it. So eventually he convinced me to come on the podcast. And Nelson Branco from TV Guide Canada wrote about us. He did a whole feature in TV Guide Canada, and I'll never forget that moment. I was eating with some friends at TGI Fridays, and Luke calls me and he's like, oh my God, we're in TV Guide Canada. And I was like, what? I didn't even know there was a TV Guide Canada, but I was so excited. And I was like, okay. So I told Luke, I said, okay, I'll do this for 6 months because I didn't understand the blogosphere or podcasts, but I saw that this was kind of a new thing. And now I have to say, I credit Luke with really saving my career in media, because, we weren't trained for any of that in journalism school. I mean, my journalism professors taught the old way, which was a dying way. And, because of doing Daytime Confidential with him, I learned about podcasting and, all of these things, and search engine optimization. And I fought him tooth and nail on all of it. He would say, Jamey, this headline that you wrote, it's not very search engine friendly. And I'd be like, who cares? I write from my gut, and this and that. It's like, I'm an artist. I don't need any algorithms. And, that was, but I tell you, I mean, I have learned so much almost by osmosis that it's like, and now we live and die by algorithms. And, literally every time I say anything on a phone, my Instagram shoots me ads of it, so I mean, I wouldn't have, I'm sort of an expert at that. And I was able to transition that into, working at the CDC as a social media expert. As someone who didn't even believe in social media, I became, one of the leading social media experts for, and this was before Donald Trump. So I know a lot of people are mad at the CDC now, but I left before things went down.
Well, I'm fascinated that you spent a decade working for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, winning awards.
Amazing time, yeah.
H1N1, Ebola, and opioid. What was that experience like?
Whew. Now you want to talk about a situation where I was able to use my talents for good. I mean, every year that I worked there was sort of a crisis that, led up to the ultimate crisis, which of course was COVID-19, which I missed. I was off doing ambitions by that time. But yeah, H1N1, Ebola. My job, I worked for what's called the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, which is the CDC's leading publication, also known as the voice of CDC. We just had World AIDS Day, and so a lot of people will know that the MMWR was the first publication to report on what was then just known as pneumocystis pneumonia among men. It was pre, AIDS even being the definition. So, I mean, it's a very prestigious publication, and it's usually when you hear something on the news at night that says the CDC is saying XYZ, it came from the MMWR first. So yeah, I started there as an editorial assistant and worked my way up to a health communication specialist, which is CDC's term for public relations or, publicist. And it was my job to take these documents that were written by scientists and put them in, layman's terms and tweets
that
and
we
Facebook.
humans,
Right, because when the doctors would send the report in, it was like wonk 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 wonk. And so I had to take that and say, hey, wash your hands because but to put it in, my job was to kind of put it in layman's terms for the masses. And, again, an incredible skill set to pick up because, what is like looking at a soap opera outline and turning it into a script? It's pretty much that same muscle, So, but yeah, I used to joke. It's like my two jobs were, tweeting about chlamydia or, returns from the dead, pick your poison. So,
well, knowing you spent so much time doing that as a communications specialist and trying to articulate something that was difficult on paper, what did you think of sort of all of the communication during the penultimate pandemic?
So this is going to sound so crazy because my ship had come in, as people would say back home in Texas. There I was in Hollywood, or Black Hollywood here in Atlanta, writing a TV show. But a part of me was like missing my old colleagues because I remember what it was like during H1N1 when, people would be pulling all-nighters. And H1N1, while definitely problematic, was a drop in the bucket compared to COVID-19. And, my hat is off to my old colleagues there because they dealt with something that was unprecedented in terms of the disease. But then there was also the fact that the CDC, it definitely during my 10 years there, and from what I heard prior to my arriving, it was always pretty apolitical. No matter who was in the White House, they kind of left the scientists alone to do the science. Ronald Reagan did. I mean, everyone has memories of that. Ronald Reagan wasn't very supportive of AIDS and HIV, but he didn't hinder the CDC from, doing their job and reporting on it. The Bushes didn't, the Clintons didn't. So my former colleagues had to deal with this deadly disease, sweeping the globe, and not to be political, but a president who was trying to strong arm them into covering it up, into saying that it was not as bad as it was. And it's like, some of them retired or just flat out quit because it was like, really, you're going to try to force scientists, some of the most pure, intentional, because look, these people that I worked with, they could be making big bucks at Pfizer or, insert any big pharma, but they are at the CDC because they really believe in protecting the public's health. And so, yeah, I mean, it was some dark times there. It's almost like a fever dream. I was talking to a friend about it. It's like, we all still remember it, but it's almost like our brains have shut off, a lot of the,
well, I think we've
really
blocked out a lot of blocked out a lot of the darkness from it. Well, it's just so impressive what you've done, and thank you for sharing. I think it's fascinating, and truly, thinking about what you and Luke have done with Daytime Confidential. What are some of the highlights that stand out? Some of your favorite interviews that you're most proud of, or
wow. So it's funny. I look back. Some of the whenever we would have Tom Casiello and Nelson Branco on to just really dish the in-depth things that were going on in the industry, that was always fun. Mimi Torchin did our show 2 or 3 times, and as I mentioned, she's one of my idols, and so that was great.
She is an incredible woman. Incredible.
Yes, Michael Logan. I grew up, reading him, watching him on SoapNet. So, gosh, he probably did at least 10 episodes with us.
I would love to sit down with Michael. I've asked, and he has said some very kind things about what I've done with the Locker Room, and I appreciate that coming from someone like Michael.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I loved him, or love him. We did Larry Flick, who, the amazing Billboard veteran music journalist, who's also a huge soap fan. So Jackie Collins, one of the reasons I do what I do. She sat down with us a couple of times. Francine Pascal, who created Sweet Valley High, which she originally planned as a daytime soap. Francine and her husband wrote for ABC soaps back in the 60s and 70s, and she created Sweet Valley High to be the first daytime teen soap, and everyone passed on it, so she turned it into a book series. So so many, I look back, Colleen, sat down with us and was amazing. Eileen Fulton, she was so hilarious, and just, her, she just was so, we joked for years because she was frustrated at the time about Lisa's storytelling. And she just, with that drawl, she said, "I just wish they'd let me die." We would kind of just, say that. It's like, "I just wish they'd go ahead and let me die." She was just hilarious. We did, our top fives, when it's just us, the DC crew, they're a little perturbed with me right now, Alan. Not perturbed, but they're like, when they found out I was doing your show, they were like, "We've been begging you to come back for 3 years, and you're going to do another show first." So
that's funny.
Well, you guys didn't ask properly. No? But
since you and Luke, are co-owners on this, do you come from the same love of shows, or he had a different?
So Luke started, Luke, he grew up in a religious kind of background and wasn't kind of able to really watch a lot of soaps growing up. He didn't really start watching soaps or even like listening to pop, to secular music until he was, a grown man in college. And so he started in the 90s. So, we tease him a bit because, for him, Days of Our Lives started, at the era of Sammy Brady and all of her, whereas, I grew up on Patch and Kayla, and, I have a love for the last 50 years of Days. Yeah. And with him, it kind of started in the late to mid 90s. And, he definitely has the same level of love for the genre, and kind of, he's a genre guy. He loves his, vampires and elves and, any of those kind of, sort of YA genre fiction type things that are super serialized in and of themselves. And we kind of have like, it's kind of like a Designing Women or a Golden Girls setup where everybody kind of has a role or a type. We've got Jillian Bowe, who kind of tells it like it is. She grew up on The Young and the Restless and the ABC soaps, and she knows General Hospital backwards and forwards. Melody Akles was the P&G fan.
It's so interesting though. I love hearing, Luke started in the 90s, and there's so many due to what I'm doing now with this show, hearing from fans who didn't watch it when it was on the air and find it on YouTube and start, from whatever they can find and try to piece it together. I recently spoke at my alma mater in New Jersey, and the first young woman who came up to me was a huge Ryan's Hope fan. She wasn't alive when Ryan's Hope was on the air.
Yeah.
Like it blew my mind. Grant says, DC was instrumental to me. It was the very first podcast I ever discovered in my childhood bedroom way back when. I've now made a career in podcasting, and I've always seen a lot of myself in Jamey. And Frederick Smith says Daytime Confidential was the first podcast I listened to. I hadn't even known about podcasts as media until Daytime Confidential. Now all I do is listen to podcasts and audiobooks for entertainment.
That's amazing. And this is going to sound so crazy, but I don't listen to them. Not, I want to, but I just have my attention span. Nelson and I used to talk about this because he would get upset with us if we were late on a podcast. And I was like, why are you're in Toronto? You've got the whole, he's like, no, I have my routine. When I go to the gym, I want to listen to, and I was like, oh, well, that's it. I don't go to the gym. So maybe if I did that, I'd listen to more podcasts. But it's really hard for me. And I think TikTok and all these things are just taking more of my attention span. But the thought of like sitting there and listening, but I'm glad people do. But yeah,
I agree with you. I interviewed David A. Gregory from One Life to Live and we were talking about his podcast probably 2 summers ago called Powder Burns. And I said I would love to listen. I love the cast that was in it. But I was like you, I don't listen to serialized stuff because the attention span doesn't do, seeing the visual of television does it for me, keeps my attention. But I have to say, I drove to Provincetown that summer, listened to Powder Burns, and I was hooked. But I also had, that dedicated time in a car to be able to do it and focus.
Yeah, but it's really taken us. Yeah, it's taken us back to the origins because it started. And I remember when my grandmother would talk about that, and she actually would say sometimes that she missed the old radio soaps, and I was just like, how could, because of course watching them in the 80s when they had the big budgets and the location shoots, and I was like, how is it fun to just, but she, said she and my great grandmother would sit around and listen to, what was it called? Painted Dreams and all of those shows, Erna's really early radio soaps. And I was like, but of course, that was the media then. But,
it was, and there wasn't, they didn't know what television was.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so
they thought it was going to be a fad, So.
Well, we have to talk. April of 2021, you joined the writing team in Salem of Days of Our Lives.
I did.
Who called you to say you have the job? What did you do when you found out you were writing for Days?
So Ron Caravati reached out. Ron Caravati and I have been friends for a long time. How we actually got to know each other was also courtesy of Luke Kerr, because one of the running jokes that we had with DC is that, if there's a picture, an unflattering picture for someone to pick, Luke is going to inadvertently pick it to use for a story. He's just I need a picture of this person, so this is what I'm going to do. And so one day we had run a story on Ron doing something for One Life. And then I get this very polite email from Ron Caravati. Hi, big fan of what you guys do. I'm going to send you guys some pictures of me. Would you please use these instead? And we struck up a friendship. And so, and that's happened more than what. So I'm like, now it's like a science. It's like, okay, if we want to get to know these people in the industry, put up a bad picture of them. Not really, but then they'll reach out.
I know, yeah. I've had actors still today reach out when they've seen something. Why is someone using that?
Yeah, so we became, friends, and he was he has been a mentor to me. Ron Carlavati, Tom Casiello, Jackie Collins. These are the people that I would go to and say, "How do I do this? What is a breakdown? What is this and that?" And Ron gave me my first trial script way back at General Hospital. And yeah, he reached out. They had what was meant to be at the time sort of a temporary 13-week assignment, and it ended up going for 2 years. Yeah, and I mean, dream come true. My first breakdown that I got to write was, I mean, talk about a childhood dream come true. It was Eileen Davidson transforming Stacey Hyduke, uh, Susan into no, wait a minute. It was Marlena Devil turning Stacey Hyduke into Eileen Davidson so that she could seduce John Black. I was like, okay, trial by fire, but I mean, we were off to the races to start writing for Days of Our Lives at the height of the second devil possession. It was like, come on, Jesus. So yeah, and we've won so far 2 Writers Guild Awards, 1 Emmy, moved from broadcast linear over to streaming, prior to that did some spin-offs and a Christmas movie. I mean, it's been amazing, an amazing time. And I have to say, some of my family members are more excited about me writing for Days than they were me having my own TV show because it's like Ambitions was nice, but now you get to write for the stories.
Well, and Donald Peoples just wrote, Amara Yuza's boss was Karen Carlavati on Ambitions.
Yes. Ron had named a character after me on Days, and so I was like, you know what, I'm going to do him. So Karen Harris is another one of my mentors. She was a writer for General Hospital, Port Charles, so many other soaps. And so I was like, Karen Carlavati. So I was like, I'll merge my, two of my mentors.
That is awesome. That is awesome. And exciting news. You've just returned.
I'm back. Yeah. It's like, what's that they say in The Godfather? Just when you think you're out, they pull you back in. But no, yes, a few weeks ago, Days reached out, and long story short, I accepted the offer, and I am back writing and having a blast. It's just
and you
great.
Enjoy breakdowns, you said.
I do. My head is off to script writers because, I mean, it's a 77 to 90 page script a week. It's like primetime writers could never. I mean, you got to turn that puppy in once a week. So yeah, I prefer the breakdowns. I do. Plus, I like the breakdown allows you to sort of get to help the head writer a little bit with layout, and so yeah, I see myself more in that sort of overall big picture than dialogue. But yeah, I mean, I just love writing, period.
So when I interviewed Lawrence St. Victor and we were talking about him writing for The Bold and the Beautiful, I asked him what his process was like. And he's got quite a process.
Oh, okay.
Like 9 versions. I think he he records the voice, he reads it or something. So I'm curious, what is your process for breakdown writing?
So no, definitely not. There's no time for 9 versions with the way Days works. Like, you got to get that puppy out of here, So no, I mean, Ron meets with each breakdown writer kind of, Monday through Friday. And he tells us the 11, the amount of characters that are in our day, the amount of sets, and we go over, kind of scene by scene. He gives you the broad strokes of what he wants to see in that day. And then, we go write a thrust, which a thrust, in prime time, it'd be called a beat sheet. And you share that. Yeah, and you share that. You share that with all of your fellow breakdown writers because we all have to track each other for continuity. So you share that, and then you go from that beat sheet to writing your full outline. And an outline is it's a narrative version of the script. It's prose, a kind of a mixing of narrative and dialogue and suggested dialogue. The script writers can take it or leave it if they want. And then you send in a rough draft for your colleagues to kind of look at and give you notes on and tell you, hey, so-and-so said this and, whatever, you might have to go track something for changing. Then you go back, edit it again and send it in for Ron's notes, and it starts all over again. So it's.
I loved reading breakdowns.
I don't know how. Look, my hat is off to Lawrence because I'm like non-version.
I can't remember I think it's 9. I might, but I love reading breakdowns.
My showrunner for Ambitions, they paired me with Kevin Arkadie, who created New York Undercover and wrote for a lot of. He said that preferably he liked to write a script 4 times before submitting it. My attention span would not allow me to do that. Like if the people paying me tell me I have to do that, I'll do it. But it's like, no, I'm going to do 2, maybe 3. But yeah. And that's just, after the notes come in. So.
Well, I wish you the best of luck next Friday.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
That's good stuff. Jason Jose said, loved Ambitions. Ambitions was,
thank you.
And he puts on fire. Tell me, where did the idea for Ambitions come from?
So with Ambitions, Yolanda Lawrence, who is a writer who has done Riverdale and Empire and so many shows that I love, The Good Wife. She was a fan of the Daytime Confidential podcast. I have to tell you, Alan, that's something that has blown my mind. How many A-list primetime writers listen to our little podcast? And, Michelle Tramble is another, Michelle Tramble, who created Truth Be Told, starring Octavia Spencer. She wrote for The Good Wife also. They're huge soap fans. And Yolanda reached out to me and was like, I listened to you on that podcast. Why aren't you doing this for a living? And I was like, well, I tried, but, it just never happened. So and at that time, I was becoming increasingly bitter, I think. And it was impacting how I podcasted. I was yelling and complaining and calling people names. And because I was miserable because I wasn't doing what I loved. And Yolanda was like, look, Will Packer wants to do a daytime soap. And I met with them, but I can't do it because I'm under contract with Warner Brothers. Would you mind if I recommended you? And I was like, would I mind? I mean, this woman had never met me and she recommended me sight unseen. You want to talk about fairy godmother. And so I met with Will. I pitched him a soap that I've been developing for the last 20 years, set in Texas. And he was like, I like that, but I already have an idea for a soap. He's like, I don't have characters. He said, but I know that I want it to meet at the intersection of everything that makes it Atlanta. Dirty politics, entertainment, sex, drugs. Can you do that for me? And I'm going to LA and I'm going to be back in Atlanta in 2 weeks. And can you have me something when I get back? And I said, absolutely. And then I went home and hurled basically, because I was like, the one I pitched him, I've been working on since college.
Right.
And so I was like, why did I tell this man I can get him a whole new show in 2 weeks? But I did. I started with, again, the journalistic skill really works well for me. I was like, okay, he said dirty Atlanta politics. So I started like looking up real Atlanta political stories and, came across
that's totally a journalist.
yeah. And I'm like, okay, here's this one woman from a political dynasty that married someone who came from the wrong side of the tracks, but he was not. So that was like Stephanie Carlisle and Evan Lancaster. And then I was like, okay, I've always wanted to do a story about warring sorority sisters. So I created Amara. And, before you knew it, I had like 40 characters because, again, we were pitching it for daytime. Then, shortly we were, meeting with executives who were trying to help us do it for like Debmar Mercury was really gung ho about, and, at that time, all we were hearing was daytime is dead. Daytime is dead. So I'm like, what? These companies want to do a syndicated daytime soap? This is amazing. But as you know, daytime soaps are really expensive, and we never could quite figure out the monetary aspects of, or the feasibility of doing it for daytime. So by that time, Will Packer got a first look deal with the Oprah Winfrey Network. He called me, my boss from the CDC. We still laugh about this.
I wish that was going to be my question. So like, I would love to have seen your face when Will tells you this is going to air on the Oprah Winfrey Network.
So I'm in with my boss at the CDC for a review. And at this point, she knew that I was writing for television or trying to break in. And so I get this call from Will Packer and I go, I got to take this. And she's like, so he goes, how'd you like to be on the Oprah Winfrey Network? And I was like, what? And he's like, I need you to retool the show as a primetime show. He's like, cut out half the characters, scale it down, and like make it about 1 or 2 families instead of 4 or 5. I was like, okay. So I did that, and this is one of the things that I have to say now because, now that I'm in the guild and, I see things kind of differently. There's a big discussion with writers like, don't do free work and don't do this and that. I'll say it like this. If I hadn't done that free work, I wouldn't have been able to sell a multi-million-dollar TV show and change my life. So it's like, I'm not saying do free work forever, but you really have to, if you find somebody that you trust, and it's
that's the thing, Jamey, trust and, opportunity. Opportunity presented itself. And if
exactly, because if I had said, well, I'm writing this on spec, I'm not going to keep rewriting this, I wouldn't have been able to sell it. And, so, he took it. Will actually, once I finished the Bible and, got it to him, he flew to Oprah's Santa Barbara compound and pitched it and called me and was like, they just gave us a 22 episode order. And I mean, I was like, so we didn't end up getting the full 22 because the studio, our budget, we went over budget. So they were like, yeah, we're going to curtail you guys at 18, but it was incredible.
But you made 18. That's incredible.
Robin Givens, Essence Atkins. I mean, these women.
I was looking at that cast. Robin, Brian White, who I love from Ray Donovan and Scandal.
Yes.
And Gino Anthony Pesci from
Shades
of Blue. Loved him. I don't know if you watched.
And their family now, it's like.
Did you watch Shades of Blue?
I did,
Loved
and
it.
I mean, it was the experience of a lifetime, and and it keeps getting second and third lives, and and my residual checks are nice, and it's crazy, but in this thing like Fleabag, when we were first canceled, it was so devastating. But I look at it differently now. I mean, if you look at some of the shows now, like Fleabag only ran 24 episodes because so many of these shows are like 6 to 8 episode seasons. So we did 18 episodes. And after we were canceled, we were put on Stars, which there's corporate synergy there because Lionsgate owns Stars and, but then they put us on Tubi and BET Plus, my dream. And look, fans that are listening, this is what y'all can help make it happen because Tracy Oliver's First Wives Club was canceled I think by BET, but they finally put it on Netflix, and it's like killing it on Netflix. Netflix can really save even like Suits. There's talk of
right. Look at Suits. Well, look at what it did for Schitt's Creek.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, from the moment OWN canceled us, I went to Will and was like, tell Lionsgate to get us on Netflix. And I know they've tried. And, that is my, I've kind of like let it go because I'm writing other stuff and doing other things. But I'm kind of like, okay, God, if Ambitions ever does a run on Netflix, maybe we'll get a reboot. So yeah, but I mean, it was an incredible experience. I learned so much. Will Packer came from the guerrilla style of indie filmmaking, and so that's what he taught me. Like, I was on set 12 hours a day. I was doing things I had no idea. I was covering casting and wardrobe and everything. I mean, it was like, from the, I kind of grew up like, wanting to be a soap writer. I would watch the TV Legends interviews where Agnes was like, Agnes Nixon was like, oh no, I didn't go to set. I stayed in Chicago. I thought that would be my life. Oh no, I'll just write. And no, it's like I was on set 12 to 14-hour days,
Wow.
5 days a week. Sometimes leaving the writer's room to go deal with an issue on set and then going back to the writers. I mean, it was wild, but it was everything I'd always wanted.
Congratulations. It really is so exciting to hear all of this. And let me tell you, when you have time, the fans are all saying you should teach a master class. They would all sign up.
Oh, wow. Okay. I just thought of one other thing I want to plug. Y'all be sure, go ahead and binge the previous seasons now of Tyler Perry's Sisters, because in 2024, season 7, I wrote 6 episodes of that. A shout out again to Ron Caravati and the amazing people at Days of Our Lives, because they allowed me to do both. That season of Sisters will air sometime in 2024. And we put our feet in those episodes. It was the first time Mr. Perry had turned over a drama room to other writers. So it was a lot of pressure on us to impress, and hopefully we did. I can't wait. Sal Stowers from Days of Our Lives is in our season. So I was like, yay, so I got to reunite with her. So yeah.
That is awesome. You are doing some great stuff, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate it. You know how it is. You kind of just have to juggle, do what you can while you can.
You do have to juggle. Keep doing, putting the positive energy out there. Look at what, what you said earlier, you were so negative and positive, just do what you know how to do, and it will happen.
I got to tell you, it's a very Oprah moment, but I read this book called The Success Principles from a writer named Jack Canfield. He was one of the people who was featured in The Secret. And I went from being one of those people who rolled my eyes at The Secret and other, Law of Attraction to but that book kicked my behind. It was like, stop complaining, stop spending time with complainers. You only complain because you know that there's something you could do to fix your life. And it was like, all my demons were like roaring when I read it for the first time. Like, no, I'm blaming this person and this person rejected me. And it's like, I really did have to keep reading it and keep doing the work and just stop being negative. Now I backslide from time to time, but
we're human beings.
Yeah. But I went from I used to log on to Twitter looking for a fight, like, what'd you say to me? Let me tell you about you. And it's like, it's like, or going to go read your bad, knowing that, okay, there's a message board where people are talking crap. So I'm going to go look at that message board and I'm going to remember you. And, it's like, when I let that go, more and more opportunities started coming.
I love that. I'm gonna make a note for that book. I'm gonna make a note.
Yes, The Success Principles. It's amazing.
Well, you have a wonderful weekend. thank you for spending the hour.
Thank you. And you're going to have to return the favor and come join us at DC at some point.
I will. We'll do it in early 24.
All right. Happy holidays.
Same to you, Jamey. Great to meet you and spend some time.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
And the fans are writing that down too. So the book.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alan. I appreciate it.
You got it. Thanks. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thank you to Jamey Giddens for spending the hour. Don't forget, Days of Our Lives is streaming on Peacock. Please join me next Thursday, December 14th, when Lionel Cole, the platinum-selling and internationally acclaimed entertainer, joins me live. Lionel will be bringing his Cole Legacy Band to 54 Below, the Broadway Supper Club, on Thursday, December 21st. For tickets, visit 54below.org. If you haven't yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, you can do so down below. Turn on the notifications for reminders of all upcoming shows. And remember, if you liked any episode, today's episode, click the like button. It helps. And remember, you can stream The Locker Room on your favorite streaming platform. Just search The Locker Room. Have a great weekend, everybody. And as always, please stay safe.